Today, let's help determine why you may be having a Hashimoto's flare and what to do about it. In my video last week, I talked about the Hashimoto's flare-up symptoms and how fun they are for us with Hashimoto's. Just like how random they are and how ambiguous, how most other people think you're probably going crazy, how you probably think you're going crazy, because they are so numerous, so unrelated, and just there's so many different ones that can be attributed back to Hashimoto's. But what do you do about it? Like, what do you do when you are in the middle of a flare-up of your Hashimoto's to be able to quell the symptoms and find relief? In today's video, I want to go over certain questions that you can ask yourself that will point to the root cause of why you may be going through this Hashimoto's flare in the first place. And then it will help you to decipher what to do about it, and then also to help you to prevent these things from happening in the future. I do want to point out that this video is going to be mainly for people that have gotten their Hashimoto's under control via diet and lifestyle. If all you've done is medication, like thyroid hormone replacement from your doctor, like the levothyroxine or Cytomel, Synthroid, Armour, Nature-Throid, any of these kind of thyroid replacement hormones, and that's all you've done, these are not going to apply to you as much. You would still watch this video and probably find a lot of value because you may be able to still answer some of these questions. However, in next week's video, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a roadmap per se of what you should do to get your Hashimoto's symptoms under control in the first place, so that way you are not experiencing the disease. Now, before I start with the questions, I want to point to you that are only using medication that it's extremely important that you understand that the disease is still going on in the background when you are taking medication. The thyroid replacement hormone just does that. It replaces the hormone that your thyroid can no longer produce because your thyroid has been attacked by your body or by something else if it's not autoimmune in nature. But if it is autoimmune in nature, the autoimmune disease is still happening in the background and your body is still attacking your thyroid tissue. So your disease will progress. You will probably continue to have ups and downs all the time. Bad days will continue to happen, probably a lot more than normal. And the medication eventually is just going to probably do an upward kind of thing because you are no longer going to be able to produce more and more and more hormone. So the disease is still happening, it's still attacking your tissue, and that's why you're still experiencing a lot of symptoms despite being on the medication. Because the medication's only just kind of helping your body do all of the functions that it needs to do, and it's not really helping the disease in the first place. So I just want to make that clear because sometimes people are like, well, I'm on medication, it shouldn't be a big problem. But that is the reason why you're going to want to do the stuff that I'm going to talk about in next week's video. So let's get to the questions you can ask yourself if you're having a Hashimoto's flare to kind of determine the root cause and what to do about it and what to not do from now on to prevent any Hashimoto's flares. The first question is, have I been eating the foods that are best for my body? This is very, very individual. So what works for you could be completely different than somebody else and for me. So maybe you have figured these out by doing an elimination diet like the autoimmune paleo diet and figured out that things like corn do not work for you. And if you eat corn, then maybe after a certain amount of time, or if you have a certain amount of corn, you start noticing symptoms. Try to think back over the last few days and weeks. Have you been eating something out of the ordinary, or maybe something more of something, like a higher quantity or occurrences of something that you don't typically eat? If so, it could point to that being an issue. A lot of these foods that are in stage 4 of autoimmune paleo, for example, can do this because sometimes they take a while and there's a tolerance issue with how much you can have and how frequently you can have it. Sometimes it's just one of those things where it takes a little while for it to show up as an issue. If you don't know what these foods are, it is a good idea to try to do an elimination diet like autoimmune paleo, or even just doing like a Whole30 or paleo to try to figure out what exactly the foods are that may cause your body to react. You could do food intolerance testing, sensitivity testing, But I do find it to be rather incorrect if you haven't healed a leaky gut, because pretty much anything can make your leaky gut inflamed and cause false positives and false negatives on a food intolerance test. So I tend to not like those very much until you've done active work to heal your gut. So for me, the gold standard is typically an elimination diet. So you remove a lot of different foods that are potentially or known to be inflammatory or problematic for people, especially with autoimmune disease, and then you add them back in one by one to see which ones cause a reaction. And if you're having a lot of autoimmune flares and a lot of bad days, this is the way to go to really kind of quell all of that activity and to quickly make sure that you start feeling better. The next question is, have you been eating a good variety of foods that are very nutrient dense? A lot of times, especially with a diet like AIP or autoimmune paleo, you take out a lot of foods and you kind of get stuck in this whole mindset that it's taking out and removing and making sure you're not eating these other foods. But the thing is, you really have to concentrate on adding in the foods that are going to heal your body, give your immune system all of the massive amounts of nutrients it needs. So I'm talking about like a wide variety of vegetables and fruits and meats and seafoods and organ meats if you can do it. If you can't do it, take the desiccated liver pills. Do something to get all of the nutrients in, because that will help you more than pretty much anything. Your body needs a lot, and just making sure that you're removing foods is not enough. Another question to ask yourself is, have you been giving yourself adequate me time or relaxation time? Because stress is actually one of the biggest triggers of autoimmune flares. I know this sounds very cliche these days, and you're like harping on it that stress is bad, stress is bad, stress is bad, but it really is. And it can, by itself, if you can have the diet all dialed in, you can get all the sleep in the world and all this stuff, but if you are stressed or not giving yourself relaxation time, recovery time, any of that stuff, you're gonna have a flare. So along with this, another question is, have you experienced more stress than usual, or like an acute episode of stress? Things like a death of a loved one, or divorce, or a move, or a child going away to college, or just any of these kind of big things can definitely cause a stressor that would cause a flare. But then there's also the little everyday little things that just kind of add up after a while. So stress relief is just so important. Another question to ask yourself is, have you been getting enough movement in lately? A lack of movement can lead to a compromised immune system, which would lead to flare triggers. And it's just overall not that great for you to not get any exercise. That is something that we can all agree on. Mass media and people that agree with very little that mass media says. Some good exercises are walking or jogging, maybe biking, swimming, Pilates, yoga. A lot of these gentler kind of things are great exercises for people with autoimmune disease. But make sure you're not overdoing it with any of these as well. Listen to your body. If you feel tired or don't feel like really doing it because you're just like run down or something, don't push yourself. And then the next question is, have you been getting too much movement in? Now, this is an interesting one for a lot of people because we have been taught, especially through mass media and everything, that we have to get all of this exercise in every day. But unfortunately, more is not better in a situation with autoimmune disease, because more can cause that stress response in the body where your body feels like it is running from a tiger all the time. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is produced a lot more than usual. And over time, this can cause some cortisol resistance, adrenal fatigue symptoms, but also leaky gut, which is a situation we're trying to avoid and heal while having autoimmune disease. Now, what too much exercise is for you can really vary depending on a person. For me, I cannot do like a 3-mile run anymore because when I do, I feel sick afterwards and I start noticing symptoms. However, I can go on a 9-mile mountain strenuous hike and have no problems. However, when I do that 9-mile strenuous mountain hike, I do take a lot of time off afterwards. I don't go do another 9-mile hike the next day, but I might do an easy walk or something like that. Or I might just sit around and not do anything for a day or two. I don't push myself. I used to do Ironman triathlons, and I fully believe that those were the trigger to my autoimmune disease because I would do 2-a-day workouts and I would really never give myself a chance to recover and rest. So if you've never done something like that and your body isn't like really sensitive to that, then exercise intolerance may not be an issue for you. However, if you are doing something like P90X or CrossFit 5 times a week or training for a marathon or an Ironman or any of these kind of like high intensity, very frequent occurrence kind of things, just be mindful of the fact that you may be putting your body under undue stress, and you may want to build in a little bit more rest time than what you would expect to do normally. And do know that you will still get fit, you will still be able to do your marathon or whatever with less activity. And it's better just to do that than to go into total autoimmune flare and get worse and worse and worse into a hole where it's so much harder to dig out of. The last question to ask yourself is, have I been getting enough sleep? Optimal amount of sleep is 8 to 9 hours a night. But sometimes we have issues, we have insomnia or something really fun's happening or whatever, and maybe you're not gonna get nearly as much. If you suddenly have less sleep, chances are you're probably gonna have a flare, and it may not last that long, but it is probably the reason why you're having a flare. So that one, as long as you get more sleep over the next few days, should probably rectify itself. So once you've figured out, maybe those questions resonated with you and you're like, oh, eureka, that's why I'm having my Hashimoto's flare, then maybe you've determined that like you've eaten something that is causing it. Then take that food out for a couple of months, maybe try reintroducing it again in a future time, but taking that food out and then doing all of the other things that you did to quell your autoimmune disease in the first place will really help you to get out of that flare. Sometimes it may be necessary to ratchet down your diet again. So if you've done autoimmune paleo and you have reintroduced a whole bunch of foods and then you're noticing a big flare, you may want to go back to autoimmune paleo for a brief amount of time, or like the elimination part, for a brief amount of time to just kind of help seal up the gut and reduce the inflammation and all that again. But I wouldn't ever AIP harder if you already are on the elimination part and you're starting to feel flares while on an elimination diet, because that's just a recipe for disaster. You're gonna start losing a lot of foods, and we don't want that to happen. In that case, it's really important that you work with a practitioner to find out if you have like a gut infection, like SIBO or H. pylori or Candida or any of these things, or parasites, or maybe certain nutrient deficiencies. There's just so many different reasons why AIP may not work for you, because there might be some other underlying root cause. And if you're still experiencing flares while on AIP, make sure you get those figured out, because the diet's not gonna help you a ton at that point. But if you've already felt better on AIP or paleo or whatever, and everything's gotten so much better, then going back to AIP is not a problem for a little while. I mean, after all, like look at me, last year I had a gigantic flare because I had kind of gone off paleo for a couple months, and that's when I went back on AIP to quell that flare because I knew nothing else was really going to do it so well. And then also I just wanted to point out that if you're scared because you're in the middle of a Hashimoto's flare, it's perfectly normal. These things are scary AF, man. You never know how much worse it's gonna be. Every day you wake up with a new symptom. They're just, like I am not a fan, and I don't think anybody else is. And when you have those bad days, like they just truly can drag you down and suck. But so don't be afraid or don't be too scared about it, because you really can get yourself out of it and get yourself into a place where you are in control of your autoimmune disease.